Hello, it's Mrs. Wallace. How are you? Just wanted to do this quick video in case you missed class. Today it is Friday, September 23rd, I believe, and we are looking at the PPC. The first thing we did in class, and it was a half day, so we had a really short class, so it is not going to be a long video. A few things we did in the beginning is we just emphasized and reviewed the PPC, so you can see the production possibilities curve or model, sometimes even called the production possibilities frontier. This PPC is on the display, so you can see it. We're looking at a society that we're assuming is making two goods. So they have X amount of resources, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, and they can make either robots or pizzas. And if we take a look at this society, if the resources are totally dedicated to making robots, they can make, say, 10 robots. If they totally dedicate their resources toward pizzas, they can make 4 pizzas. And so a society could pick point A or could pick point E. Both of those points are what we would call productively efficient. They're both using all of the resources. And for that reason, they're producing each unit at the least cost. It's efficient. But at the same time, we're getting something very different. And of course, points B, C, and D are also points that any society could choose if they were making just these two goods. And the bottom line is, of course, over the course of time, societies may move along their PPC. A society might decide if they were producing only robots, they'd like to also produce pizzas. As you move from point A to point B, in an effort to gain maybe one pizza, we notice that we have to give up one robot. And the interesting thing about this curve is because it's concave to the origin, we see increasing opportunity costs. So to move from B to C and then point C to D is presenting us with a steeper slope and basically an increase in opportunity costs. In order to get that next pizza and the next pizza, the third pizza or the fourth pizza, we actually have to give up greater and greater quantities of robots. And that law of increasing opportunity costs is because resources are not equally suitable to make the same, to make the goods, right? Robots might be better served by resources that are really, really focused on making robots. People who are trained how to do that, factories that are designed to do that, very, very different than, say, pizza ovens or individual labor that is working specifically to make pizza, okay? A very specialized skill, something I wish I had. But in any case, we talked a little bit about all of this yesterday. This is a model that's really all about displaying the necessity of opportunity costs and that there's like no free lunch. You want to get more pizza, you have to give up some robots. And we need as a society to think in those terms. One way that we looked at this in class, and I'm just going to like kind of switch out the slide that's here. I'm not stopping the video. I'm just going to switch out the slide. We looked at some political cartoons, and I'm going to do this kind of quickly and just give you a sense of some of the examples that we used. The reason we looked at some political cartoons, they happen to be from World War II. And this is one, I had read about these political cartoons in like an econ journal, and I thought it was really interesting. Maybe because I'm a history teacher, but we often use the PPC when we describe societies that are torn between the production of guns or butter. In other words, a society that might be at war, for example, might all of a sudden be in a position where they are producing weapons, using resources to produce weapons, and that might cut into goods that are consumer goods. So if we kind of assume, guns represents military goods, and butter represents consumer goods, what's the relationship? And of course, different societies, even not at war, have different decisions when it comes to this interaction between military goods and consumer goods. But we can look at U.S. history and look at World War II as a time period where the United States in 1941 is entering into World War II, which had started in 1939. But by 1941, 1942, even into 1943, the U.S. government is moving with companies around the country and with consumers around the country to dedicate greater degrees of production to war needs. And so some particular products like rubber, for example, or other things that might have been needed for the war might have been, something that people could not easily get. People actually had ration booklets during World War II. Some consumer goods were so scarce because the production was moving toward military goods, that there was actually a shortage, and people had to only get a few bars of butter a week or whatever it was. People had rations that dictated how much they could get. So it was that the allocation of goods became very much affected by this PPC. Dr. Seuss, we're familiar with, Green Eggs and Ham and whatever, was a political cartoonist for some time. And this is a example of a political cartoon. If we had some ham, we could have a victory omelet. If we had some eggs. So, consumers don't really have the goods that they need, and there is a huge, shortage because some of the materials were being used for production, for military production. This is one, all aboard if you insist, but if you want to stay home, if you want to help the Army stay home. So this is kind of a messaging that suggests, you could go away for the holidays and you could use the fuel and get in your car, or you could take a train or whatever, but you are going to be harming the production efforts of the military. So if we were drawing this on a PPC, we'd be seeing, this society, the US during World War II, moving from butter to greater military consumption, giving up, butter. And some of the butter in this case includes travel. This is one where, people are debating what they would recommend happen next in World War II, but people are ignoring the scrap metal that might be in their backyard that could potentially be dedicated. And there are these drives to have people bring scrap metal. So this is like another example of ways that consumer goods, even old recyclable type consumer goods, could be used and, salvaged for materials for the war effort. Okay, so we're kind of looking at just this being, based on opportunity costs. This particular one, sorry, I'm going to go back, is you can't build a substantial V out of turtles. And the bottom says dawdling producers. This is Dr. Seuss's commentary of sorts, and the V is like symbolic of victory. How would we reach victory as a country in World War II? Well, one way not to get there is dawdling producers, producers that are slacking off, aren't really producing their maximum amount, and so they are causing a great deal of problems. We won't have a strong military if we don't have, strong producers. So there's almost like this kind of, call out for businesses, right, to be able to kind of come to the table with a lot of production. This next one, MacArthur, hope it won't show you up if I'm sick a bit. And MacArthur is one of the generals in World War II, mere matter of 6 million work days a month. So we're looking at, the home front health chart, and there is this, people are calling in sick. But, Dr. Seuss is saying, wait a minute, it's 6 million work days a month. And for us, for the PPC, we know that there are points inside the PPC if society is inefficient. And so, in other words, what's happening if workers are not reporting to work, there's actually less war production is going to be inefficient. And so some of this is just a commentary on that. We're also looking at, these ads that maybe people in the 1940s would see, do with less so they'll have enough. Rationing gives you your fair share. And then there's a picture here of a ration book that basically told people, you have to ration. This is, you have to do. You would get like a little stamp when you went to pick up your butter or whatever it was, and you could only get a certain quantity. People were deprived of some consumer goods, right? And of course, there are societies that put a great deal of their efforts into military goods at the expense of consumer goods. Okay, so that's just like one example to kind of make the PPC a little bit more real. Sorry, I'm going back to my thing. Okay, the only other thing, and I'll keep this really short, the only other thing we started to talk about, and we're really going to talk about it a little bit more next time, is we looked at what happens when, we know that some societies are producing at point U. This is a society that's not using all of its resources. So U is a society where there is not any potential to have points A, B, C, D, or E. All of the points that are on the curve are productively efficient. It means that they're using all of society's resources. Nothing is like slacking. There's no unemployment of any kind of resource. But we also can ask the question, how would we as a society get to a point that's like way out here? Say we want more robots and more pizzas, we would look to have economic growth. How do we become a society where that's possible? And when we talk about economic growth, something that's going to make that possible is the potential productivity, and the PPC and the resources allow for that. So there are a few different ways in which we could expand our PPC. Okay, so a growing economy is going to look something like this. Okay, the PPC is now going to shift to the right. If we have a growing economy, the PPC could have a shift to the left if we have an economy that is not growing, but something that's stalemating, right? Something that's decreasing. There's a few things that could actually increase the PPC. One would be increasing the quantity of resources. So, for example, more people in the workforce. That could happen through migration. That could happen because of some sort of governmental policy, maybe social change or social norms, more women going back to work, education can change. So there's a lot of ways that you might have the quantity of a resource. The United States, for example, could find more crude oil in a particular location. And then that finding would enable that particular resource to be in greater quantity. It would increase the potential for productivity. Other things that can increase the PPC would include technology, which can enhance resources, and anything really that can enhance the quality of a resource. So if we're talking about labor, things that might enhance human capital for a laborer might be education, training, some sort of specific wellness program, whatever it is that can enable greater productivity for labor. If it's land, it might be some type of technological effect that makes land more fertile, more usable, perhaps something that negates climate change, all kinds of issues with every single different type of resource, things that have an effect on the quantity or the quality of resources are going to shift the PPC. If the PPC is shifting to the right, it doesn't suggest that we definitively have economic growth, but it implies that this is a society that's setting itself up for potential economic growth. Okay, I will see you next week. Have a good weekend and be well.